Hey, how's it going? Have you ever had a concept occur to you as a kid, but you've not had a clear answer as to how to do the thing or whether it would even be possible? And then you thought about it again as an adolescent and still not had a clear answer. And then you thought about it again as a young adult, but you still didn't have a clear answer. And then finally you thought about it again as a proper adult and you at long last realized that you're just too stupid to figure this out. Well, today I'm giving you my version of that, so don't expect some grand conclusion at the end of this, because I don't have one. To be totally honest, I'm not even sure if I have a point with this video, but what I do have is a series of sentences which will probably make me sound like an idiot, which should be amusing for you regardless. Anyway, here's the idea that's occurred to me repeatedly over the years. A language. Nice work, idiot. No one's ever heard of a language before. A specific language. The idea is kind of simple. If we were to invent a language, build it on purpose from scratch, which is called a conlang, by the way, according to linguistics nerds. It's short for constructed language. It's just a way of saying a language some dorks designed on purpose instead of it evolving naturally. A conlang is like Elvish from Lord of the Rings, or Klingon from Star Trek, or Dothraki from A Song of Ice and Fire, or whatever. Well, obviously, in the context of their fictional universes, those ones did evolve naturally, but like for realsies, they were just someone sitting down and trying to figure out how to make a language that works. Okay, so let's say right now, we design a language from the ground up, except let's say we're designing a language for it to be the universal second language for all of humanity. So someone from the UK or the US or Australia or whatever would still probably learn English first. Someone from Spain or Mexico or whatever would learn Spanish first. Someone from China would probably learn Mandarin or Cantonese or whatever first. But all of them would learn our special language second, and they'd use that special language to communicate with each other globally. Oh, yeah. So just Esperanto then? No, not just Esperanto. Esperanto was suboptimal, much like my brain with you in it, which leads me to the actually important part of this idea. Since we can design this language however we want, let's ask the question, is it possible to design a language to be optimal? And also, what does optimal even mean in this context? That's my question anyway. All right, buckle up. Let's talk about talking. Okay, so this hypothetical optimal universal language idea would be a language which is globally the second language learned by everybody. I do genuinely wonder if this is a really good idea that just needs executing well to actually work and to catch on. Unlike Esperanto, the linguistics equivalent of a loose pile of IKEA parts. I shouldn't be too mean to Esperanto, as if I'm that knowledgeable about it, to be honest. It tried to amalgamate the cultural influences of many languages into a single international language, which kinda sort of represents everybody, but not really. It was a really cool idea, but it's not the same thing as the scientifically, mathematically optimal language that I'm suggesting. In other words, if we were to make an optimal language, we could make it in a way which is scientifically engineered to be optimal for our purposes. In fact, we could design it in a way where people would want to use it, like it would be more practical for them to use. Like, I'm not proposing we go around threatening people at gunpoint unless they speak the language we made. That would be fucking dumb. This is meant to be us trying our hardest to make a genuinely useful tool. Now, I understand not everyone might be on board with this concept from the get-go, so let me do a bit of salesmanship right at the outset here. I think a universal optimal language would be a good idea for a few reasons. It could be designed to enable fast and precise communication, which would save a huge amount of time in the aggregate. Think about it. If it's only slightly more efficient than all the other languages are on average, say the average person on Earth saves 2 seconds per day worth of just communicating slightly quicker and not having to clarify or re-explain things quite as much because the language is just very easy to understand. Just 2 seconds per person per day would be over 1,000 years saved per day if you tally up all the time saved by all of humanity. And that's every single day, time that we currently waste. That's worth something, right? It would also save lives by minimizing misunderstandings in medical or engineering contexts. I can't count the number of times I've woken up from general anesthetic and the surgeon's been like, "Oh, I was meant to give you a spinal tap? I thought you said an anal flap." Well, that's embarrassing. I'll put you back on the waiting list. In the meantime, enjoy being able to give a round of applause by passing gas. Our new language also needn't replace the culture of existing first languages. Even if we made this language that I'm suggesting and everyone ended up speaking it, I still think we'd hold on to the old languages, if for no other reason than for artistic expression, which they would definitely be better at doing than the thing I'm suggesting. In fact, I wonder if it might actually help preserve first languages versus what we're doing, which is like largely anglicizing the whole world, as well as like French and Mandarin and Spanish and the other languages that you could say they're kind of linguistically colonized places, sort of. I don't know. There's a lot of baggage associated with the word colonization, but I just mean to a degree, you are forced to think in the way that the language you speak forces you to think. It kind kind of imposes one culture and all of its baggage and assumptions on people that learn it. Like in English, we don't give every object a male or a female label, and I think it's good that we don't do that because it seems kind of nonsensical. I like that we don't bother with that. But also, in English, we usually say adjectives, the describing words, before nouns, which are objects and people and places and whatever. Some languages do it the other way, which I think is better. If I say I can see a morbidly obese, degenerate, knuckle-dragging homunculus, that requires you to hold all the adjectives in your head until the noun shows up and then retroactively apply all of those adjectives to it. But if I said that I can see a homunculus, morbidly obese, degenerate, knuckle-dragging, now I get the noun at the beginning and I can add all the adjectives like modifiers one by one to the image I have in my head. I feel like that makes it slightly easier to understand and visualize things properly. I don't know, could be wrong about that, but it does for me anyway. So could we make a language which is also completely acultural in how optimal it is? Is that possible to do? To on purpose not bring cultural influencing with it, but just ask the question, what would be the best way to design it? I don't know if it's possible, but it might be. That's what this video is about. So I've come up with some properties that I think this wonderful, mythical, magical, optimal, perfect science language might have. Let me know which of these you agree and disagree with, because it's possible that some of them might be in opposition to each other and we might have to prioritize. And then we've got to ask the question of what the optimal language would prioritize if it were optimized correctly. But anyway, let's talk about the properties first. Sorry to interrupt, this is just a quick message to say, statistically speaking, you're probably not subscribed, so I'll make you a deal. Press the subscribe button and I won't come over to your house and do this. Huh? Alright, thanks. Back to the video. So I think an optimal language would be as accessible as possible. So part of this would involve looking at the International Phonetic Alphabet, which is just basically a table of all the mouth sounds it's physically possible for humans to make, and crossing out all the sounds that can't be made by everybody. You know, like how when Japanese people try to pronounce L's in the English language and they end up sounding like R's. It's also like how I am literally physically incapable of rolling my R's. Like, here's my best attempt. So the phonetic inventory of the language we're designing does need to be super accessible. No one with some weird, unusual first language should be unable to pronounce any of the parts of our language. I think the language should also be ridiculously easy for people to learn. Even if you're an adult who never learnt another language in their entire life, to this end, maybe an optimal language could take the form of a procedural language which follows a set of rules to generate words. Imagine if you could procedurally generate words for brand new concepts, or figure out words for things even if you haven't been told its name explicitly. That would make learning it massively easier. Question is that actually possible? Something else that might be important is, I think an optimal language should use the minimum number of spoken syllables as well as the minimum number of written symbols possible to communicate an idea. That would minimize the time and effort needed to write something down or speak something to another person. Bonus points if the way the symbols are written also minimizes the ink you need to write it or the pixels your computer needs to display it, although that might be going a little bit far. Something else is, I think the language would have to be optimized to be very hard to misunderstand. So for instance, just as an example of how you might consider doing this, human languages use consonants and vowels. Consonants are the hard sounds like t, k, j, v, m, d, and vowels are the open sounds that you need to use to connect the consonants together smoothly, like a, e, o, u. In most languages, you can freeform how you put these two ingredients together, but in our language, one grammatical rule could be that all the words could begin and end with a consonant, and another rule could be that all words must alternate between consonant, vowel, consonant, etc. for however long the word is. That would make it obvious when one word ends and another begins, because those will be the only points that two consonants are next to each other, so that would make it significantly harder to mishear what someone is saying. Also, regarding the symbols of this language, they should probably be as different and distinct from each other as possible, and also distinct from all the others in all directions, so it's immediately obvious if you're reading something upside down, for example. Like, there's no situations where like a U and a lowercase n kind of look the same but just flipped upside down. We should have no instances of that. Something else we might consider is we could maybe try and make it so that you could learn this language without really having a teacher. Like, if all you have is stuff written down on pieces of paper, could you actually pronounce things correctly? Could you learn the language fairly easily, learn its systems of how it gets put together, and learn how to pronounce things? Like, could you look at the symbols and based on what the symbols look like, maybe vaguely know what sounds they're meant to make? Maybe the language's symbols could imply the sound somehow. Not sure, this one's secondary, but it would be cool if we could do it, or at least do a limited version of it. Something that I think is important is, if we were really doing this, I think it would be important to make this language work in tandem with a number number system, which in its own right should be as optimal as possible. I did once come up with a base 12 number writing system a few years ago, and I can see what I was going for, but I think it was a little clunky in retrospect. But you know, this hints at how starting from scratch I'm talking about. And all of this opens up the question of what base we should use for these numbers. Would it be base 10? I've always liked base 12. Maybe it would be that. Maybe it would be base 6 or 16. Maybe it would be binary. Let me know what you think on that front as well. And here's a cool thing I've thought about. If this language project were really executed very, very well, if it really were actually optimal, I feel like the language wouldn't really evolve, or at least it would evolve presumably more slowly than other languages do. That would be because any changes to words as they already exist would maybe either make the words longer, not shorter, because shorter words are all already used for other concepts, or it would just make the whole language more confusing because it would break a bunch of the rules and now things don't really make sense and you're not even really speaking the same language anymore. Anyway, hypothetically, if this is how it could work, it means that someone thousands of years from now would be able to read it and understand it, which is unlike how we have to very carefully decode ancient languages. Now, are there some problems with these ideas? Almost certainly. Now, I've just kind of flung a bunch of ideas at you, but I've been thinking about this kind of optimal language thing for a while, and I've really never come to a satisfying conclusion as to how any of this would work. Like, I've tried designing brand new alphabet systems with unique consonants and vowels that are used in this new language, and it's very hard to hit multiple of these optimization categories simultaneously. Like making the symbols simultaneously very simple and mutually distinct and representative of the sound they make, and all asymmetrically designed in some way so that you don't get letter pairs like, you know, P and D or U and N that kind of look similar under certain circumstances. It's really hard to get all of those things to be true at the same time, and maybe it's impossible. Also, I mentioned designing the language procedurally to construct all the possible words with whatever meaning you could need out of simple rules, so that kind of an infinite number of concepts already exist and have names before a person actively goes and names them. I don't know if this is strictly possible. If it is, it would be amazing, but also, maybe a procedural language like that would necessarily include words for a bunch of nonsense ideas which no one will ever use. If so, that would probably make it vastly less efficient. Like, the language is not optimal if the word for aeroplane ends up having 7 syllables in it, but the word for giraffe yodeling to the tune of Sweet Child of Mine while wearing a toupee and falling first into the Mandelbrot fractal only has 6. Anyway, tell me your ideas in the comments section. Does this whole concept make any sense at all? How would you design the optimal language? Is the concept of an optimal language a good concept in the first place, or is the whole thing just a pile of garbage? Because it could be. Let me know. I intuitively feel like there must be some way of designing a conlang that is essentially the best. Maybe it has to only be best based on limited here and now cultural values or something. Maybe that's the only context in which there's something that could even potentially be optimal. Or maybe there's some other constraint that I haven't thought of. I'm not sure, but if there's any actual linguists in the audience, I would absolutely love to hear your thoughts on this, because I know there are a bunch of conlangs that already exist that have a bunch of really interesting properties, and I love finding one and going, oh yes, that's a really smart idea I never would have come up with, and that totally could be useful in the optimal language were you to make it. Anyway, thanks for watching, guys. Join my channel if you want to support my work. Big thanks as always to my elite level channel members, Thunderbolt22810, who is fluent in over 6 million forms of communication, Nomad Greg, who's only fluent in one, but he's like really fluent in it, Yannick Spade, who invented profanity by making love to a dictionary, Andrew Maul, who doesn't need punctuation, time itself pauses to catch its breath each time he finishes a sentence, John Bejarano, who was once told to watch his language. He's been staring at a dictionary for 34 years now, and thanks to all my other members too. As always, I'll catch you in the next one. Over and out.